Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Amanda Weiss, and I am a licensed clinical psychologist with NAMV's Veterinary Mental Health Support. So, NAMV's VMHS offers professional peer support groups for vet med professionals, as well as individual support sessions for veterinarians. And we also provide educational webinars and presentations about relevant mental health topics in your field. So, doing meaningful work that you're passionate about, unfortunately, does not prevent stress, as you may be very well aware of. So, it is crucial to prioritize caring for yourself, which is why today I will be sharing a smorgasbord of self-care options to actively improve or maintain your well-being. You can think about the suggestions that follow as an all-you-can-eat buffet. You don't want to fill up on too much that you feel sick, and you don't want an empty stomach either. So the invitation is to determine how much you need to fill your self-care plate and to choose the buffet items that will nourish your well-being. For many people, working in the vet med industry is a very meaningful and rewarding career. The roles and responsibilities of vet med professionals are truly important and necessary. You are the most essential workers, pouring all of your care and effort into the well-being of animals, having difficult conversations and holding very heavy space for clients, witnessing pain and heartbreak to joy and love and everything in between. So, side note here, not all superheroes wear capes. And while the satisfaction and meaning that many experience is certainly a protective factor, given the nature and demands of veterinary medicine, the risk of burnout and compassion fatigue are also ever present. The stress is inevitable, absolutely. Fortunately, though, it is still possible to do this type of work and not rack up such a high toll. For anyone in a helping profession, it is vital to make regular deposits into your well-being bank to ensure you have enough to give to others without overdrawing from your own account and dipping into the negative balance. So self-care is about so much more than taking a bubble bath and eating your favorite sweets. By definition, self-care is the practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own health and well-being, particularly during times of stress. It means making and taking the time to do things that preserve and improve your physical and mental health. And at this point, you're probably thinking something along the lines of, I wish I could, but I just don't have the time. Or I'm too exhausted to do anything for myself after caring for patients and dealing with the clients all day. Or maybe even something along the lines of, it's selfish to take care of me when there are animals in need. I'm not a mind reader, right? Thoughts like this are just some of the usual suspects involved in the avoidance of self-care. And so buying into these kind of thoughts can be costly though. And so instead, I invite you to thank your mind for that thought, take a deep breath, and keep listening. And so now I'm going to be talking a bit about the domains of well-being and relevant acts of self-care for each domain. So there are several domains of well-being and many self-care options for each domain. And so you could think about it like a pie. Each slice represents a different area of well-being, such as physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, workplace or occupational, social, environmental, intellectual, etc. And so this is the only time you might hear this, but in this context, wellness involves eating the whole pie, right? So not in one sitting, but with one bite and one slice on your plate at a time. And so if you think about the various domains of well-being as flavors, the idea is to identify the flavors that are most relevant or meaningful in your life. Everyone's pie may have different flavors, and those flavors can change over time. And so the serving size of each slice will also differ and vary depending on what's happening in your world and what areas of well-being require the most attention and acts of self-care at those moments. It can be helpful to create a menu with a variety of self-care acts to choose from, including mastery activities that provide a sense of accomplishment, pleasurable activities that you enjoy, acts that provide a sense of comfort or soothing, and options for the different flavors or slices of your wellness pie, right? So physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, workplace, etc. So when it comes to physical well-being, some self-care options, and these are just suggestions, can include eating regularly and nutritiously, staying hydrated, getting enough sleep and rest, keeping up with hygiene, having an exercise routine, getting checkups regularly, seeking medical care when needed, taking time off when you're sick and really taking care of your body and helping yourself heal, setting stressful technology boundaries, right? Our technology at times feels like it's attached to us. And so being able to put it down in the service of picking something else up for yourself. Could take day trips, vacations, just doing enjoyable physical activities, getting massages or other type of body work, right? But things that are going to, self-care acts that will really nurture and support your physical well-being. Another, kind of common or popular or necessary domain of well-being is our emotional well-being. So some self-care actions could include spending time with energy givers, right? Who are the people in your world that, kind of increase your energy? You can hold yourself kindly, which is like self-compassion, setting boundaries, for yourself, staying connected with people that you value, celebrating your small wins, identifying and seeking out comforting people and outlets, you reading your favorite book or watching your favorite movie or play, listening to your favorite music, putting out the welcome mat for whatever feelings are coming up without judgment, allowing tears to fall when needed. Crying is one of our most helpful coping strategies when we allow ourselves to just release what it is that we may be holding on to, and that release comes through our tears. Finding things that make you laugh. You can express anger or outrage in constructive ways. One of my favorite ways is taking a bowl of ice cubes, going outside and throwing ice cubes down onto the cement or a hard surface. That for me, is a really helpful way in kind of letting out the grr that comes, with anger that we could feel in our body. Another domain of well-being is our psychological well-being. And so for that, you may want to consider, if needed or would be helpful, participating in some sort of support, counseling, or therapy, or participating in a professional peer support group, joining an online community, journaling, taking a mindful moment or taking a break can be really helpful for our psychological well-being. And then practicing self-compassion, mindfulness, gratitude, and agency. And so mindfulness means purposeful attention in the present moment with curiosity and non-judgment. So mindfulness involves taking an observer stance, like a curious puppy, and being in the present moment with openness to what's unfolding, rather than being entangled in the mind's judgments and stories about what's happening, not happening, or should be happening. Or, kind of time traveling to the past or future where there's nothing tangible that you can do. And it's only in the present moments that we have choices and can take action. Mindfulness provides you with really important information that helps you to see problems clearly and as they are, So you could recognize and acknowledge when you have an unmet need or there's a challenge that you're facing, and you can address it with honesty and determination. Mindfulness also helps maintain an open awareness of our experiences and allows us to regulate our current mood or mind state. It disrupts these secondary emotional processes, right? So feelings about feelings, thoughts about thoughts, thoughts about feelings about feelings about thoughts about thoughts, right? And so that kind of rumination or mind NATO that can occur. Mindfulness allows us to be with the natural emotion or thought as it's occurring rather than, bringing its friends along. Mindfulness also provides us with an opportunity to respond with clarity and intention rather than reacting on autopilot. It also facilitates connections with others, with ourselves, with our environment, and so much more. And so, a disclaimer for when you're practicing mindfulness: your mind will wander. That is the mind's default mode. It's a time traveling machine. However, with practice, we can strengthen our awareness muscle so that anytime your mind wanders, right, the invitation is to congratulate yourself for noticing and using your five senses or your breath as an anchor to bring you back to the present moment. And so, mindfulness can be, breathing exercises. And so paced breathing exercises, right? And paced breathing exercises involve counting. So like box breathing, when you breathe in for a count of 4, hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, and then hold that for a count of 4. Right, and you can repeat that a few times, or something like 4, 7, 8 breathing, where you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold for a count of 7 seconds, and then you exhale for a count of 8 seconds. And so these type of breathing exercises can be particularly helpful for those secondary emotion processes that I was just describing, right? When you notice an initial thought, taking a deep breath into it, being with that feeling, making space for it, but you're tending to it in the present moment in this mindful way so that you're not getting entangled with the thoughts and feelings and just further, kind of exacerbating that emotional experience that follows. You can also take mindful moments, throughout the day, and I will describe, in a bit some ways to take mindful moments during work or, before work, after work. Uh, Mindfulness also means noticing and naming our internal experiences, right? So when you name it, you can tame it, right? So here is overwhelm. I'm noticing guilt thoughts. Oh, here it is, the I'm an imposter story. I know that one. Thanks, mind. But in this way, we're relating to our thoughts a little bit differently, and we're opening up to them. We're welcoming them. We're making space for them. We're acknowledging them, right? We notice, we acknowledge, we name them. And then that's going to give us more of an option of then what we want to do with this thought or feeling that's coming up. And self-compassion, and a user-friendly way to talk about self-compassion is to call it holding yourself kindly. And so this just means, showing up for yourself in an understanding, caring, supportive way, right? Having a gentle and warm stance towards yourself, just like you would someone that you care about, right? Versus more of a judgmental, kind of critical stance towards yourself. And so instead of self-judgment, self-kindness inspires you to be brave and to take action to improve your situation, right? It means having the courage to set boundaries, have difficult conversations, seek help, and stand up for your well-being. Self-compassion is the fuel that propels us to take action in the face of challenges. It's a source of strength and resilience in difficult situations. It provides comfort, safety, and soothing when we're hurting. and it provides a powerful antidote to the harsh self-talk that our inner critics love to throw at us. It bolsters psychological well-being. Right? It makes us feel more confident, have, higher self-esteem. It even improves our performance, right? When you think about some of the more critical ways that you speak to yourself, right, it can really skew our perception of ourself and bring on different types of thoughts and feelings that make it, even more difficult to feel motivated, to be focused, in a way that allows us to perform up to our capabilities. And so, these are just a few of the hundreds of benefits of self-compassion. One thing I will mention is that self-compassion is not about positive thinking or letting yourself off the hook. It means acknowledging the difficulty, the pain, and responding with kindness. And so some ways to put this into play are using kinder words towards yourself. And so think about the type of best friend that you'd want by your side, right? What would they say to you? How would they speak to you? And then try speaking that way to yourself and making sure that you're using a kind, caring, warm, gentle inner voice. Kind gestures are often a powerful way to put self-compassion into action. And so some suggestions here are, gently massaging, an area that's tightened up or painful. You can place your hand over your heart or where you feel any emotional or physical pain, or really anywhere in your body that feels comforting and soothing. And then take a slow, soothing breath and send a sense of warmth and kindness through the hands and into the body, right? So, imagining that your hands are filling up with warmth and kindness, placing a hand over your heart or anywhere that feels comforting or soothing, just taking a deep breath in, feeling that warmth and comfort flow, exhaling, breathing in that kindness and exhaling. And that can be, a comforting, soothing, kind gesture to offer yourself. You could also offer yourself or, do kind acts or deeds for yourself. So, think about what are the little acts or deeds that you can do to be kind, caring, and supportive to yourself. Right? The invitation here is to find your own way of tapping into your values around self-care and find little ways of looking after yourself. So self-compassion and mindfulness, right, are really two wings of the same bird, right? Mindfulness focuses on acceptance of experience and creates space. Self-compassion focuses on caring for the experiencer and creates warmth. So mindfulness asks, what am I experiencing right now? And then self-compassion asks, what do I need right now based on what I'm experiencing? And so gratitude is another way to, kind of tend to our psychological and emotional well-being. And so gratitude, means actively appreciating and savoring the pleasant and neutral moments and experiences, as they're happening or after they happen. So life serves us, both sweet and sour dishes, the stuff that sucks and the stuff that matters. We need to acknowledge both, right? Balance is the key here. Right? We don't live in a world of all sweet. There is the sour. But we have to be intentional about acknowledging the sweet because the negative is like Velcro, right? Anything negative that happens, it kind of just sticks to our mind like Velcro. And these positive and neutral experiences, it's like we're wrapped in, saran wrap and they just kind of glide right off of us. And so we need to make sure that we're clocking in on these pleasant and neutral experiences and moments and acknowledging them, right? And as you're, practicing gratitude, do not forget about yourself in this practice. Right? Self-appreciation provides the emotional resiliency and self-confidence we all need in order to give to others. Right? So make sure that you are, acknowledging yourself. What is something that you appreciated about yourself in that day, in that moment? And it's usually in our most difficult experiences or moments that we need a little bit of self-appreciation. And so in the face of this challenge, what was something that about yourself, and how you showed up that you feel grateful for? So one way of, bringing gratitude into play or putting gratitude into play is doing five-finger gratitude. And so the end of each day, what is one big thing that you're grateful for? What are two small things that you're grateful for? And what are two things that you appreciate about yourself? Or, one thing, that big thing you're grateful for, one small thing you're grateful for, something that you learned today. It can be helpful to acknowledge as well, right? Having this growth mindset. And then two things, about yourself that you appreciate. And you could play around with, what those numbers are, but at least trying to think of five things. And you can also do this a little bit more informally as something, is unfolding that you're feeling grateful for. You can just take, a moment to pause, acknowledge it, and then savor that experience. And then you can also practice agency, right? So agency is taking action on what is in your control. Another area of well-being is spiritual. And so when it comes to spiritual well-being, some self-care actions that could connect with this area are reflection, meditation, or prayer, spending time connecting with nature, spending time alone, right? So some time in solitude, clarifying your values and then sprinkling them liberally, around your day to day. We'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. Celebrating milestones with meaningful rituals, listening to inspiring music or reading inspirational literature. You know, Spiritual self-care is also just being open and curious, right? Rather than, kind of getting stuck with these preconceived notions or being entangled with, certain thoughts, but just being open and curious, contributing or participating in relevant causes, nurturing others, and nurturing yourself, right? Singing, playing music, uh, expressing gratitude can be another spiritual act of self-care. Participating or engaging in practices for acknowledging loss. These are also known as grief rituals. And having some awareness of non-material aspects of life. And in that awareness, making sure that you're acknowledging as you're participating or connecting with that. And then for the workplace, right, this is another area of well-being. So some self-care acts here can be interacting with coworkers, right? And certainly that could be about, work-related things, but it could also be, taking a moment just to connect and interact as humans. Taking breaks for a snack or a meal, even if it's for 15 minutes or 5 minutes at a time. But as you're doing this, try to eat mindfully, right? Rather than, kind of eating on autopilot, noticing the temperature of the food, noticing the colors, the aromas, but just, being present as you're, snacking or eating. Staying hydrated, setting practical and reasonable limits, right? So those boundaries and limits. Negotiating for your needs is another act of self-care. Asking for help or delegating. These are really, really helpful self-care acts. Flavoring your values into your, day-to-day at work. And again, we'll talk about that in a moment. Starting or participating in some sort of self-care group. So that could be a mindfulness group or a yoga group, or even, on, your a break, if you have a break, or creating a break where it's, just 5 minutes, 15 minutes, even before work starts or after work starts, maybe taking a mindful moment with your colleagues, or whoever's around. It can also be helpful to have, groups or meetings for support, or, consultation groups, or, being sure to debrief, having like debriefing meetings or consult conversations or meetings. But again, not carrying everything on yourself, but being able to, communicate with others and have these kinds of conversations. When it comes to self-care, and this could be either in the workplace or in any area of your life, it can be helpful to have a self-care buddy accountability system. And so whether this is something that, you do in your workplace, or you have, a friend that you do it with, this can be helpful to, keep yourself motivated to take care of yourself. And so they're going to be even, so in your work, right? It's back to back, a lot is happening. And so this idea of, infusing your workday with self-care actions, you may have, kind of some resistance to that, right? Or objection to that just because it is so stressful at work. But there's ways to be able to kind of incorporate some of these self-care actions into what you're already doing, but just having a little bit more intention there. And so mindfulness is a really helpful way to, kind of maximize self-care in what you're already doing. And so you can have mindful transitions to and from work, right? And so on your commute, right, as you're driving or on, public transportation, noticing objects, colors, shapes that are right in front of you, notice and maybe naming. Right? You can, do some progressive muscle relaxation using the steering wheel of your car, right? This can be particularly helpful when there's traffic, right? So you're, kind of tensing the wheel and then releasing, tensing and then releasing. Listening to music mindfully, noticing, certain instruments, or noticing feelings that come up in relation to the singer's voice or certain lyrics. Um, if you're having dread thoughts on your way to work, you can acknowledge those thoughts. Here is a dread thought. And then try changing the noggin channel to a few things that you're looking forward to, or something that you're grateful for, right? Or if you're having, worry thoughts, acknowledge those thoughts. Here is a worry, and think about what is in your control in that moment, right? Rather than, kind of creating a mind-nado about something that there's nothing you could do about in that moment, right? If you're noticing critical thoughts on your way home from work, right? Acknowledge those thoughts, and then pivot to identifying a value that you acted on that day, or something you did well or appreciated about yourself or learned that day. Right? The idea here isn't that we're trying to get rid of these thoughts. We are, acknowledging them, we're naming them, but then we are choosing a more, something more helpful content, or something more helpful to focus on in that moment. Okay. And so before you go into, your workplace building, or before you go into your home, tune in to what's happening underneath the skin, right? You can practice some of those paced breathing exercises that I had shared, right? And again, that's just, involves counting your breaths. You could take a moment to mindfully connect with nature, right, before you go into your home or into your workplace. And throughout the workday, there's ways to be able to take mindful moments as well. So when you're interfacing, with clients or patients, this could be in office or over the phone. You can notice the temperature of the air as you slowly breathe in and out. And so there's a subtle kind of change in temperature as you breathe in and out. You can try pushing your feet into the floor, wiggling your toes, and bringing all of your awareness to the sensations of your feet on the floor. Listening with more than your ears, right? So much of communication is nonverbal, and we miss out on information and understanding when we only hear the client's words, or we're stuck in our own minds already responding to what the client's saying, right? And so, noticing, their facial expression, noticing, emotion on their face or in their words, right? But this is going to give us more information, right, that can help you determine how to respond next or how to navigate the rest of that conversation. While you're interfacing, with clients, you can, with patients, right, you can use the animal to ground you, right? Look into their eyes. That's also, you get a little extra dose of oxytocin that way as well. Notice the texture of their fur, feathers, or scales, as you examine them. Right? If you're holding an object, notice the texture and how it feels in your hand. Right? Again, we are looking for ways to be able to sprinkle in some self-care with what you're already doing. And so these are going to help you to stay in the present moment rather than being entangled with other, inner experiences that can, add, stress or distress to that moment. And again, you can notice and name thoughts and feelings that arise. Here is impatience. I'm noticing frustration. I'm having the thought that this client is going to react poorly when I deliver this news. Or again, aha, there it is, the I'm an imposter story. Thank you, mind. Right? Again, but when we name it, we can tame it. It's giving us information, what we need to manage our, experience in that moment. You could also offer yourself some mindful moments when you're doing computer work, right? Noticing the textures, sounds, and sensations when your fingers hit the keys, right? Noticing the brightness of the screen and how that feels on your eyes. Could even, especially take mindful moments in between appointments and tasks, right? So while your bodies are physically, present in the moment, your mind can be somewhere else. So when transitioning from one thing to the next, it could be extra helpful to take a mindful moment so that both your body and your mind can arrive, especially as you're going from appointment to appointment, right? With a newly birthed animal, then a terminal pet, then a wellness visit, then into a euthanasia appointment, followed by an injured animal, and then another new baby animal appointment, right? All while interacting with a range of personalities. Understandably, there can be, a lot of thoughts and feelings swirling and no time to process before you're in the next room with a different patient or interacting with another client, again, whether over the phone, in person, and so you may be thinking, about what just happened while also thinking about what will be waiting for you in the next room or talking to one client after another, having multiple conversations playing in your mind at once, right? And all of these are recipes for mindiness and overwhelm. So instead, try taking a mindful moment between tasks and appointments to reset and center yourself. And you could do this in under 60 seconds. So the following suggestions can be done while walking, standing, or sitting, depending on where you are and what you're doing. You can mindfully sip cold water or hot coffee, noticing the temperature as it enters your mouth, subtle changes in the temperature as it moves around, noticing the reflex to swallow and the temperature as it goes down your throat. You could splash your face with ice cold water. That can help to regulate your internal experience a bit. Slowly inhaling essential oils, just savoring the smell. Notice the subtle change in temperature of the air as you slowly breathe in, and then as you slowly breathe out through your nose. You could also breathe into any unpleasant sensations and exhale with a deep sigh or whoosh. Or whoosh. Moving and stretching the body around. You can squeeze a stress ball and notice how it feels. And, pushing your feet into the floor, wiggling your toes, bringing the awareness, bringing your awareness to the sensations of your feet on the floor. Again, you could do this as you're sitting or walking. Take a deep breath in as you tense the muscles in your body. Hold for 5 seconds, and then slowly release your breath and relax your muscles as you say relax in your mind. Right? So you're breathing in, tensing your muscles, holding for 5 seconds, breathing out, relaxing your muscles as you say relax in your mind. And as I mentioned earlier, box breathing. So slowly inhaling for a count of 4, holding for a count of 4, slowly exhaling for a count of 4, and then holding for a count of 4. Can you repeat that a few times? You can also look around the room and name 5 things that you see, something you haven't noticed before, or a few things that are a particular color and shape. And again, these are just ways to be able to, reset, recenter, bring ourselves back to the present moment, when your mind is, understandably, kind of time traveling a bit. If you're walking, you can try taking intentional steps, right? Putting your heel down, then your toe down, then lifting, right? So heel, toe, lift, heel, toe, lift. Or on each down step, push your feet into the floor and bring all of your awareness to the sensations of your foot, sensations, sorry, bring all of your awareness to the sensations of your foot on the floor with each step. And notice the pressure alternating from the right foot to the left foot with each step. Right? And so these again are just some ways to bring mindful moments into, your day-to-day things that you're already doing, but adding some self-care to what you're already doing. And so a little bit of a disclaimer, these aren't going to get rid of the thoughts, feelings, or stress that you might be experiencing. But many vet med professionals that I've worked with have found that doing any one of these for even, 10 to 30 seconds helps to ground themselves in the present moment, let a bit of air out of the internal pressure cooker, and feel a bit more balanced. Again, some of these can be used during appointments, on phone calls, while writing notes, or really any time you need a reset. The invitation is to experiment and identify which work best for you. And so some tips to get started and to keep going. You want to make the self-care practice or action realistic for that particular minute, hour, day, or week. Choose and schedule simple self-care acts. The invitation here is to think small, because starting small increases opportunities for success, which often helps boost motivation to continue. So look for opportunities to sprinkle self-care into the things that you're already doing, right? So like we had talked about, with the mindfulness and self-compassion, there's ways to infuse that into your day-to-day, what you're already doing. You're just bringing some more present moment awareness to it and allowing yourselves to meet a need as you're on the go. Another tip is to acknowledge and try to praise yourself for engaging in these self-care acts, right? And so a lot of the time, we might be doing something that is really helpful for ourselves, but we're not really giving ourselves credit for it. But I can, bet you that things that you weren't doing, you maybe have criticized yourself for it. So we just want to, give what we are doing to help ourselves as much, if not more, attention than, the struggles that we might be facing. And so we acknowledge, hey, I just, uh, took an action in the service of my, physical well-being or in the service of my emotional well-being, go me, right? You can even, celebrate your self-care action, but if that feels like too big of a leap, then, just try, acknowledging and praising yourself for it. Something really, really important here is to be flexible, right? As you're, and starting to try to sprinkle or continuing to sprinkle self-care actions throughout your day, look out for that all or nothing trap, right? Well, it should be, I can't, I can't do it for a half hour, so I can't do it at all, right? And so it's never going to be perfect, right? And so looking out for opportunities to even take 60 seconds, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it might be, but that we don't need all or nothing here, right? So look for the gray and where you can be flexible, because doing a little something is way better than doing nothing at all for your self-care. I also encourage you to follow a plan and not a mood, right? And so feelings are going to come up, and those don't necessarily need to stop us, right? And so instead, focus on the next step or action rather than getting too caught up or stuck in your feelings. Your mood is likely going to fluctuate during or after the activity or action that you had planned to engage in. I also, encourage you to be aware of shoulding all over yourself. Right? Try to choose acts that align with your values and needs. We're going to get to the values part in a moment, but with regard to, needs, consider the ways that your body and mind hold and relax and react to stress. Right? This includes thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that follow. Right? Also reflect on the ways in which your personal and professional lives are affected by stress. Ask yourself what needs tending to, and then build from there. Again, you really want to remember to honor your oxygen mask here, right? Just like, if you're on a plane, they say put your oxygen mask on first, right? It's not because they're encouraging you to be selfish, but the idea is if you don't put your oxygen mask on first, within, 60 seconds or so, you're probably going to be unconscious and then you can't help anybody else. And so we need to, put our oxygen masks on first. You need to breathe in the air for yourself to be able to, breathe, air and life into others as well. And so those are just, some tips to, get started and keep you going, some information about the different domains of self-care and, and a bunch of suggestions for how to, kind of what types of self-care acts may, work for those areas of well-being. But again, the invitation here is to really identify, what your needs are and getting creative and brainstorming what self-care options, will work for you. So when looking at self-care, just like anything else, it can be really helpful to clarify our values and, and then choose the actions, committed to those values or aligned with those values. And so making time to flavor your day with the who and what matters, and then savoring that experience is vital to rebuilding or maintaining well-being, to cultivating balance, and to truly supporting and caring for ourselves. And so values are your heart's deepest desires for how you want to behave and act on an ongoing basis as a human being. It's not about what you want to get or achieve. And so values aren't something that you check off the list, like a goal, something that you can accomplish. Right? Values are something that we are continuously taking action to move towards. Right? So you can think about values as a compass or a lighthouse. Values clarify the direction you want to move towards. right? The value that you want to be putting into play here. And then, our values serve as a guide in identifying and choosing what steps or actions to take. So when we know what's important and we know what we want to be, kind of putting into play in that moment, that's going to really help us, to clarify, identify, well, what are the steps and actions that I can take here that are going to be moving me in that direction of that value? Right. So some questions that, kind of uh, are relevant here is, what do you want to stand for in the face of this situation, issue, etc.? How do you want to put your values into play here? How do you want to treat yourself, colleagues, patients, clients, the community? Right? How do you want to show up for your self-care? Right? Or, how do you want to show up for yourself? Or how do you want to take care of yourself physically, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, etc. Right? So again, when what your values are, right? And so, for example, connecting with nature, sporting, certain values are going to help guide what your options are that you can, choose to be acting on that will allow you to be more aligned with your values. So you want to be sure to focus on what is in your control, right? So looking at the process over the outcome. And as humans, we are so entangled with the outcome, but a lot of the times, outcomes are out of our control. So, but we could look at, what we are doing along the way, right? And so in any given day, so much that happens is out of your control, particularly when it comes to the outcomes that you want and the outcomes that you get, right? So a little bit of this, outcome or reality gap. And so focusing on what, is out of your control becomes a recipe for suffering. And so instead, focus on what is in your control. What can you do, right? Like how you want to sprinkle your values here, how you want to act and behave in that situation. Regardless of the outcome, when you focus on the process and the values-based actions you took, you're going to succeed way more than you fail, right? So rather than asking yourself if you're good enough, right? Ask only, am I showing up with blank, right? And so insert value here, right? Am I showing up, in a way that's aligned with this particular value? And again, when it comes to self-care, self-care can be the value, right? Or there's other values that may be more closely aligned with self-care that you want to be acting in the service of. Right? But in any difficult situation, we have a choice. We can leave, we can stay and give up, and that's going to, usually exacerbate it if we, give up, or we can, choose to stay and live by our values. Right. And so, doing whatever you can to, improve things, to make room for the stress that's inevitable, right? Open up and make room for difficult thoughts and feelings. Practice self-compassion. Take a stand and put your values into play in terms of how you treat yourself. And if you can't, you know, uh, and when there's something that's out of our control, you take control on what is in your control, the words that you say and the actions that you choose. Right? Even if it's just moving your legs into a different room, and taking some, a moment of solitude, right? So this taps into this values-based problem solving. In the face of the problems that I'm dealing with, what values do I want to live? And how do I want to turn those into effective actions to deal with the actual problem, right? And so in the, case of, stress, distress, burnout, compassion fatigue, what are the actions I need to care for myself to improve my well-being here? Boundaries are really also important when it comes to, or in the discussion of self-care. Right? So feelings, our thoughts, our feelings, and other internal experiences, they function as reporters, right? They give us a whole ton of information about what's going on with ourselves and what we need. And so, listen to the broadcast of what your, body, your heart is telling you, and use that information to guide your actions towards self-care. Right? And so we can set boundaries, in the service of our needs and our values. Right? So setting boundaries in the service of self-care or well-being, setting boundaries in the service of self-respect, self-preservation, self-protection, playfulness, whatever it may be. Um, but just remember that we can only set and maintain boundaries for ourselves, not others. And so the invitation here is, to be firm or flexible with your boundaries as appropriate, given, the context of the situation and what you need or want there. Um, the last, thing to think about when it comes to self-care in the workplace is collaboration. And so teamwork makes the well-being work. So I invite you to try to have a we versus me mindset. When it's a me mindset, it feels like, this bigger burden, this boulder that we're carrying that feels so much heavier and can weigh us down. And so with a we mindset, that can look like consulting with your colleagues, especially when it's around a really difficult, decision like euthanasia, right? Ask for support, debrief after really difficult cases or conversations. Don't feel like you need to be carrying the weight of everything on yourself. And so the more that you are working together, communicating, the more you won't feel like you're alone. And we know that support is so important for well-being. And so asking for support, collaborating is a way to take care of yourself. And so I will wrap up today with 12 self-care tips for helpers that was written by a compassion fatigue specialist. So take stock of what is on your plate. Start a self-care idea collection, and hopefully from today you'll have at least several ideas to start with. Find time for yourself every day. Again, whether it's 5 minutes or 50 minutes or anything in between or beyond that, just making sure you have some moments to yourself. Delegate, right? Learn to ask for help at work and at home. Have a transition from work to home and from home to work, right? And so I had mentioned some ideas for a mindful transition. Those may be some ways to get you started with that. Learn to say no or yes more often. Assess your trauma inputs. Also learn more about compassion fatigue and burnout, right? Knowledge can be power in the sense of, when we know more about something, it could help guide us in ways to manage it or navigate it more effectively. You can consider joining a consultation or professional peer support group. Those can be beneficial for so many reasons, but one of the top reasons is not feeling so alone in what you're going through. Another tip is to attend conferences, workshops, or professional trainings. Um, and then you can also consider modifying your hours. And last but not least is to exercise. Hold on one second. I'm so sorry about this. Last but not least is trying exercise. And with that, I consider you to be, flexible and not get stuck in that, all or nothing trap there. And so even if it's, walking around the block, that is still exercise. It's still physical movement. And so those are, again, just some tips from a compassion fatigue specialist. And so I want to wrap up today by first sharing my gratitude to you all for taking the time to be here and to learn about self-care in veterinary medicine and how to start sprinkling more self-care actions throughout your day. And again, there was a lot that was shared today. The invitation really is to figure out what your needs are and what is the best way for you, or not necessarily the best way, but the most workable way for you to start sprinkling, acts towards your well-being into your day-to-day without needing to rebuild the house, right? The foundation is already there. It's just doing a little bit of interior design work to make sure that there's more self-care actions for yourself. And so again, I thank you for being here today. Wishing you many moments of mindfulness, of gentleness, and of showing up for yourself in a kind, caring, and supportive way. Take care, everybody. Bye.